Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of Let's Talk About Risk. Today, and that's what we're trying to do, we're going to start focusing on different industries. So in this opportunity, we would like to focus in the aviation industry. And for that matter, we invited Mr. Ian Matheson. Mr. Ian Matheson is an aviation expert with almost 30 years in the industry and in different types of companies. So with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Matheson. He can give us a little background about his expertise. And please, Ian, welcome to Let's Talk About Risk. Your initial words first, please.
Well, thank you, Alfredo, and thank you for the opportunity to be your first industry guest. I've been really interested in the first few episodes that you've put out, and excellent guests and very interesting topics. And aviation is pretty timely right now. Quickly about my background is I started off in the industry fresh out of university into the FBO part of the world, working with private aircraft and hangaring and fueling. Moved from that into commercial airlines and in Canada. And then when the Vancouver Airport Authority was the first privatization in Canada, I was lucky enough to be part of that team, worked through that privatization and the delivery of the initial infrastructure, and then moved to Santiago, Chile, again with the Vancouver Airport Authority team, delivered Santiago. From there, I moved to the construction side of the world, was hired by Bechtel, the US engineering company based in London, England, as their Vice President of Development and Operations for Altera Partners. We did projects in Curacao, in Lima, we were in Cyprus at the beginning. And from there, I came back to Canada, worked for a large engineering company, putting their aviation group together. And in 2016, went out on my own and started 3BP Solutions, which stands for Third Bowl of Porridge, and the Goldilocks principle of complete solutions. We can get into that later if you'd like.
Perfect. Yes, if you can, please introduce us to 3BP. What's the main focus? If it's only focusing on aviation, infrastructure, and which areas specifically of consulting do you guys perform?
Well, primarily we focus on aviation and have done so, but we're fairly broad transportation infrastructure group in the sense of the background of the various team members. We describe ourselves as problem solvers, and we like to take the time to understand the problem with our client and come up with a complete solution, like I was alluding to before, and make sure that we're delivering not just a cookie cutter solution off the shelf, but actually looking at what our clients require, what the stakeholders need, and what the objectives of the community might be, and make sure that what we do is deliver on all aspects. We focus on project management, owner's representative work, and strategic consulting.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go to some of the topics about risk. Definitely, the aviation industry has been one of the industries that has been more impacted by different unforeseen circumstances, right? If we go back to the beginning of the century, we have 9/11, then we have smaller pandemics, and lately, obviously, in 2020 or the end of 2019, we have COVID-19. So the impact of that has been major and significant. I think perhaps this has been one of the industries most affected by the pandemic. So let's start with that. Do you feel the industry was prepared enough, knowing that we were impacted by different unforeseen situations? The industry had a risk management. What do you feel in general about the industry and these scenarios impacting, this crisis impacting?
Well, the industry does get disproportionately impacted with unforeseen or black swan type events around the world, where there's a major impact economically or geopolitically, or in this case, a health crisis. Aviation is one of the first to feel the effects, just because of the global nature of the business and the sensitivity of the business. Now, I'm fairly outspoken in saying that the industry was not prepared, should have been more prepared, and must be open to preparing for the next pandemic. Because if we are really honest with ourselves, we can see that since 2003, that there's been now 6 pandemics in the last 17, 18 years, averaging about every 2.5, 2.8 years, there's some sort of contagion that breaks out and spreads globally. The reality of that is aviation is the accelerator of that distribution, whether they like it or not, whether we like it or not. The fact that we can connect people from one end of the world to the other in hours, well, it's our greatest strength, it's also our greatest weakness. And until the industry embraces and understands that they are responsible for transporting those ticking time bombs, biological time bombs around the world, and take action to resolve it, the industry will not recover. We continue to talk about 2019 numbers as some sort of target. I think it's a false flag. It's false hope. That's suggesting that was the best, most optimal use of our resources, which I'm of the opinion it wasn't. What we should be focusing on is getting a healthy industry, a sustainable industry with the building blocks for the future. And that, in my opinion, starts with health safety. And until we deal with that, we're going to have these starts and stops. And we've been talking about it for over a year. And that's where I think we are right now.
But with those points mentioned, it is not only the industry's responsibility. Obviously, there is a leadership that has to be taken, but there's also a combination and a strained relationship between what the government does and the industry does, right? Obviously, if you start placing different policies by different governments, instead of having a one single platform or idea that the industry brings forward, do you think that's contradiction, or the government should have been more active in that?
Well, I would suggest that it's easier for the industry to lead and come up with a solution than government, because we're not talking about a single government. We're talking 195 countries. So to try to get 195 countries to institute policy in a consistent basis, that's not how the industry's worked in the past either. There's an issue, they basically look at it, they try to resolve it, and then the industry puts forward solutions. The reality is that the health agencies of every country have the responsibility for the health of their citizens. So it's not surprising that on February 28th of 2020, when there was a realization that this coronavirus, COVID-19, was spreading like wildfire, that 34 nations simultaneously shut down air travel because they knew that that's where it's coming in from. Back in the beginning of 2020, the industry said they lost 50% of capacity in that days, but that's not true. They lost 90% of demand. There was only 10% of the world's population flying, but they wanted to, if their whole message is always spin, 50% of capacity, because they were still talking about the rebound and talking about coming back. They had 50% of the seats flying, but only 10% of the total seats actually occupied. The industry from the beginning has been trying to work on a strategy of hope. Let's hope that this thing resolves like the last ones. They have not, using temperature checks and self-serve health surveys as far as countermeasures are offensive, because they actually do nothing except cost money to an industry that's already losing money. Those countermeasures in SARS, H1N1, MERS, Zika, Ebola, all of the lessons learned said that those were useless in identifying contagions. But we have nothing new yet. It's a false
sensation of safety, right? I remember having one conversation with you in the past, right? In the past about the security measures after 9/11. They were mostly put forward to give that idea of comfort, but perhaps they were not completely efficient in some senses.
Well, that's a very interesting discussion point, the whole issue of security. So in 1972 was when Richard Nixon signed into law the requirement for people to be searched in the United States. Every person and every handbag had to be searched before they got on the plane. This was the beginning of today's paradigm. Since 1972, the aviation industry has not changed its base philosophy on security. which I don't know about you, but I can't think of many things that in 1972, as far as policy, were good policy that I want to have here today with the technology and cultural improvements that we've had. Yet aviation bases its entire security matrix on a 1972 concept that says, I will search everything, meaning I will find the needle in the haystack by searching at every piece of straw, which is a flawed system from the beginning. And so what I was saying about 9/11 was all they did was bolt on more process to an already outdated system. The concept, when you think about health, safety, and how that relates, when you line up for security, you line up for check-in, or you have long processes in an airport that congregate people, those are health safety risks now with the transmission of a virus like COVID-19 or its variants. We have to move away from that. And we have to move back to 1971, where people just went straight to their airplanes, because with the advent of smartphones and the privacy that we have opted out of, we've given away. This device, when I buy a ticket, it can tell you if I'm a red flag or not. Because if we think about it, 99.99999% of travelers want to get home at the end of the flight. So why are we searching all of those people to try to find the 0.00001% of people that want to do us harm? Mm-hmm. If we flip this on its head and we say, how do we get all of those people out and to opt into something different so that the outliers are now the people we focus on? So for example, if you think about Nexus or something like that in Canada, people are paying money to give away their biometrics so that they can stand in a shorter line. But what if we turned it all on its head and we said, if you opt into this new system and register, give away the same information you're already giving away in Nexus, and allow us to work together as a team, make passengers your partners, then you could actually make security a revenue generating. It's not a cost base. Right now, it's billions of dollars out the window to keep honest people honest. If you turn that around and I pay my annual fee, $100, whatever it is, now security makes money. You don't need all those security lines and people. Because when I come up, you have a random selection of no security screening, just go straight through, a small check or a deep check. And when I get there, it's push notified to my phone. It says, Mr. Matheson, would you like to proceed through security? Yes. All right. Go through door A, B, or C. And I don't know which one's which. And I walk straight to my airplane 99% of the time. And the people that have not opted into that system, well, those are your red flags. Those are the people we search. So you make airports efficient, you make security a money-making proposition, and you reutilize all of that overbuilt infrastructure we have to the benefit of the industry. So it all relates back to this.
Yeah, and you know, one of the main principles of the aviation industry is safety and security, right? So you can't sacrifice, let's say, resources, but you have to make those resources efficient to provide that safety and security, right? And going a little bit to your example, God forbid, but if that 0.0001 want to do harm, they are not going to go through the regular process to do it, right? So
I've long believed that security in aviation keeps honest people honest. That's all it does. And I was talking to Solomon Wong of Intervistas a few months ago. We did a podcast about this very topic. And he made the point that security is rigid. Aviation security is rigid rules. There is no variation. And because of that, it's easier to defeat because we know where the borders are. There's no randomness to it. You know, and that's one of the elements. You start by making it a little more random, but the reality is that the cost of security is one of the key elements that's driven the entire bloated industry. Well, because security costs money and you need to build the infrastructure to move all those people through that screening, you need to make more money. So you build more commercial space. You build more commercial space so that you can pull more dollars out of the pockets of passengers while they're waiting for flights. So now we want to push dwell time. We want them to spend more time in our airports so that they will spend more money. All of that is counter to the number one driver of the industry today, which is health safety. We want them to move through there faster and not talk to anybody, get on the plane and keep going. It's 180 degrees from what the industry was doing up until January 1st of 2020. And the industry has not figured this out yet. They all think they're going back to what it was, and they're dreaming. Because, for example, business travel was only 12% or 19% of the actual people in seats, but it represented much higher value as far as percentage of revenue. I know from my business, my clients, they're asking me to do everything by Zoom or by Teams or such for the initial consults. And we're now walking through plans together, not on site. So I would say potentially, 1 out of 5 trips that I would have taken, I might travel about 20% of what I used to. And I will travel in a different way. I won't be, the way that it was before. I was very apt to pay for my business class and do all those different things because it was frequent and I was trying to get through the system. But when the system shifts to doing something that's lower cost and I walk straight to my plane, all of that model is going to change. And none of the airlines have figured this out yet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic again. The unquantifiable adverse effects of the pandemic have been huge, impacting not only airlines or airports, but also all the side business, right? Infrastructure development project, consulting firms, site services like ground handling, retail, the same security providers, catering, etc. What is your thinking about what suggestions or what ideas can we bring to start generating back some revenue streams to these companies that obviously are driven by passengers and by aircrafts?
Well, I think the problem is deeper in the sense that the associations and the authorities that are leading the industry are continuing to talk about getting back to normal, to the pre-pandemic age, if you will. We're not going back. That is it's a fantasy, and the longer people live in that, the less chance they have of being successful in the future. So I think the first thing is to understand we are in the post-pandemic reality of aviation. We've been in this long enough that people want to travel. They really, really do. I agree there's pent-up demand, but the moment somebody steps on a plane and that experience is profoundly different than what they used to remember, or God forbid they get sick, that is going to continue to change the profile of how people want to travel. And until we figure out how to manage that better and make the customer experience one that is comfortable and safe, actually comfortable and safe, we're going to have a hard time coming back, because number one, there's going to be continuous waves of this and other viruses. So there isn't going to be a steady climb out like there was after 9/11, SARS, MERS, H1N1, all those other ones where they actually burnt themselves out. This will keep going. The vaccines, all the doctors are saying too, with the variants, they don't know how the vaccines or how long they're going to last or how well they're going to work. So this is going to be a long-term struggle. As far as revenue, I think what we need to do is stop trying to put Band-Aids on it, address the real situation, and pivot into what the new industry is going to be like. And I think that if you look, one of the questions you had asked me earlier when we were kind of getting ready for the interview was the associations. And it was interesting because you said IATA, ICAO, and ACI. And IATA and ACI have no business being brought up in the same sentence as ICAO, because IATA is a lobbying group for airlines, basically. They represent airlines and nothing else. If you read their mission statements, their first is profitability of the airlines. The second is reducing the cost of the airlines, not through their operation, but through tariffs and fees coming after airports and governments. So they're not an association that's looking out for your health and safety. They're an association that's looking out for the airline's bottom line, full stop. ACI similarly is all about the airports. And unfortunately, ICAO, a UN group that actually has responsibility for civil aviation, is followed suit much the way that many authorities have, where they're abdicating authority. You think about the safety aspects of the Boeing 737 MAX and the safety checks that were abdicated back to Boeing from the authorities, and what happened there. The same things happened in our industry. Everything was going great, so you just start pushing more and more responsibility to the others. If you read ICAO's restart plan, they talk about getting back to normal as soon as possible, stopping COVID-related procedures as soon as possible to get back to where we were. Nobody's looking forward, everybody's looking backwards. And this is one of the systemic failures of this industry. There is no innovation in perhaps the most innovative business in the world, right?
Yeah,
we fly big metal tins from one end of the world to the other, yet we cannot get our heads around changing security.
Now, talking about politics, and obviously, we mentioned a little bit about the role of the government, but let's talk about specifically in Canada. What has been the role of the government? Have they done enough? Have they just been kind of reacting to what private sector like airlines or airports were suggesting, or have they been passive enough? I don't know. What's your idea?
I would say that there's not a single politician or health official in Canada that is not working hard to try to come up with a solution. Everybody's heart is in the right place. Our system is not set up for a pandemic response. In Canada, you have 13 different provincial and territorial health authorities that are responsible for delivering health services in their region, their province, or their territory. The federal oversight of that is only responsible for certain things. So today in Canada, we do not have a single source of the truth, a central organization that's responding to the pandemic, ensuring that we're all doing the same things at the same time. In BC, our provincial health officer was lauded at the beginning as doing a great job. The province was in good shape. But of course, you can't stop the pandemic anywhere until you stop it everywhere. Yes. So each province doing its own thing just ends up with one doing better than the other for a while, and then it switches because things move around. We are in the third wave, and we are still doing the same things that we did in the first wave.
So we're going down borders,
and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's not. There's not enough communication to people. It's not engaging people to do their part. Basically, it's shut down and stop moving around, stop transmitting the virus, but I have no tools to participate. So our contact tracing, we have hundreds and thousands of contact tracers across the country that are trying to contact trace in an analog fashion in a digital world, calling people, physically talking to them, doing long interviews, then trying to figure out who's who instead of using a digital platform like the one that we developed, 10.3, to actually aid them. But the problem is that everybody has their little kingdom, and
of course,
they're all doing it their own way. And we did work with the National Research Council of Canada and with the Public Health Agency at the federal level. We've had everybody say this is great, like a system that enables people to self-report and notify each other in a digital way to help the public authorities is great, but nobody wants to be the first person. The fact is, it's happening already through Facebook. It's happening informally and in a way that the government gets no data and no support. But they don't want to enable it in a way that empowers the people. Everybody's still on the strategy of hope this thing goes away, and it's pretty frustrating.
I forgot to mention that one of the good ideas and one of the developments that your company 3BP come up with was a solution, like a private initiative to try to stop spreading the virus. It's 10.3. You mentioned a little bit briefly about it. Can you expand a little bit on that, please? What is 10.3? What was the objective, the idea, or the vision behind it, and where is it standing right now?
10.3 was, and 10.3 stands for timely exposure notification. The 3 stands for the 3 things that we know we can do to slow down the virus, which is hygiene, proper use of PPE, and physical distancing. What happened was we were looking at the restart. We issued a paper called Airports and Aviation Reimagined back in April of 2020, talking a lot about security, rethinking security. And we came up with a pilot program that we were trying to launch where people could move from the curb to the cabin of the airplane in 30 minutes or less without having any interactions using their smartphone. These initiatives you're now seeing all over the place, but this was back in April of 2020. But we realized when you got to the cabin of the airplane, we had a problem. You can't fly airplanes around with the middle seat empty because it's bad for the environment and it's bad financially. Yeah. So we were trying to figure out how could we put people into the airplane in a way that we had some moral responsibility. And I actually put this moral responsibility on the airlines right now, that if you're going to put people on an airplane, seat them shoulder to shoulder in the middle of a pandemic, you have a responsibility to put a system in place to make sure you inform them if somebody around them gets sick in an anonymous way that's privacy protected. And the airlines up until now want the government to do that for them. So, but the government doesn't have the access to all the information. So essentially what happens is with 10.3, it's an anonymous app. You do use an email to sign up, but it doesn't need to be, your email. It can just be any email. That email is used to verify the account so that we can, if you delete the app and you reload it, it'll have all of your history in it. Essentially, when you go in and out of an event, like you get on an airplane or you go to a restaurant or you just go to church or you go to school or you go to the movie theater or watch a sporting event, you're in a location for most of the time in your seat. And so what we're able to do is we're able to locate your device at that seat and then any other devices around you within that 6 feet or 10 feet or whatever CDC tells us for a duration of 15 minutes or whatever they change the parameters to be, we link those devices on a local level. And if you get sick and you have a positive test, you have the control to report that. And that if you report that, anybody that was in a shared bubble with you over the last 14 days gets a notification that says you were exposed, and then it basically gives you the information of your local health authority. And our app works globally, any phone to any phone. Whereas, say in Canada, you need a public health number to report. So if you're a German tourist skiing at Whistler and you go home and 2 days after you get home, you get a positive test and you want to tell all the people in Canada, you can't. You can't use the Canadian system. And it's much more detailed than that. There's people, if they'd like to go to www.ten3.ca or on our LinkedIn page, you can see videos of how it works and lots of information. Where it stands today, unfortunately, Alfredo, is we are trying to get another endorsement from the Canadian government and Apple. So we're up on Google, we're up on Apple, but Apple has a very high bar to cross. And they need specific language from the government. We've gotten letters from the government previously supporting us, but we're about 2 weeks away from probably losing our Apple publication if the government doesn't step up. And that brings a little bit to the point, right? The speed of how government is reacting or adopting these private initiatives is in such a way that slow that perhaps when all the checks and balances go through, perhaps it's too late, right? That all these initiatives really have been a waste of time and effort, and not realizing that they could have been early enough adapting that a help to avoid the spread, right? Because what you're mentioning is that like bubble controlling. If I have been connected with 25 people yesterday and with 5 people tomorrow, there's a potential 30 people that could have been in advance adverted that they could have been in exposure, and that obviously would have stopped the spread of the risk. And it's so simple, and we're complicating it so much. In the sense of we're trying to get vaccines, we're trying to do all these very complicated things. If we share information in a timely manner, we can stop the virus very quickly, because if you can get to 75% of the people that have had close contact with an infected person over the last 10 days, if you can get to those people within 2 days of the positive test and they isolate and take proper measures, you break the chains of transmission.
Yeah.
And if you break the chains of transmission, you slow the virus. This is very simple. It's contact tracing from 100 years ago. And people hear the word contact tracing and they think about they're being contacted. We're not tracing you. We're tracing the disease.
This is.
And if you do it with a system like 10.3, or there's other ones like Trek Secure, who are doing it they've specifically focused on how to do it for airlines. If you use those systems, you break the chains of transmission. If you break the transmission chain, this thing slows down. But if you miss it, that 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, 16, 32, 64, and that's where we are today.
That's right.
And now we're in bigger trouble because we didn't get in control. And now we have variants. Now we have double mutant variants. And the efficacy of the vaccines is not forever, and it is not tested against these variants. And this will continue. I mean, we're going to be in this for years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately.
No, unfortunately. Going back a little bit to the specific aviation, thank you so much for sharing this initiative of 10.3. Now it's clear, like I was going to ask you, because I have that in my notes, how to recover to previous standards, but it's clear that we cannot go back to previous standards. Previous standards will not work. We have to adapt to a new reality. So how to be ready for the next crisis? It will happen sooner, later, hopefully with less impact, perhaps with more impact, but how to make an industry flexible to be ready for the next crisis?
Well, again, it's actually fairly simple. And if it's maddeningly simple, because if we accept that there will be more communicable diseases moved around, pathogens and contagions that they're going to break out. This is just going to happen. That if we look at it that way, we should be able to take aviation and change it from a global accelerator of infectious disease and make it an early warning system and a shield against moving these things. Because if you did have a system, so I'll use Trek Secure, so I'm not talking about myself. Trek Secure is a system that basically using the passenger locating numbers, so all behind counter, back of the house work, they can connect people on planes without using the information that they've already put in for their contact information. If every airline was using that, or every government was using that, and an infectious disease broke out, and the CDC made a note and said, hey, this has happened, and they started to actually look for that and notify and use the Trek Secure system or a system like 10.3 to identify it and start getting to people very, very quickly, they could break those chains of transmission. And in fact, aviation could be the canary in the coal mine. It could be the early warning system because it's going to see it first. It's going to notice these movements first. And if you could have a system that would allow you to catch it in the place that it's going to happen first, you could then avoid it from moving quickly in land borders and through seaports and such. So I think that there's an opportunity to pivot 180 degrees back from being the accelerator of infectious disease to being the early warning system shield for the world. And I think it just takes everybody getting on board and changing. I mean, it's very difficult. It is Mount Everest, it's been told to me, to try to change security. But if you opt in for Nexus and pay $100 to get in a shorter line, I should be able to opt in and say, go ahead, you can have my search history, you can have my purchase history. The phone's already listening to everything I say. Even if you've turned Siri off, she's underneath every one of your apps. People have Alexa and Google Home in their homes. Like, why are we not? It's okay for us to give away privacy for the convenience of playing a game or getting a map, but for our health, we have an issue. That does not make sense.
That doesn't make sense. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's a very simple move. It's just moving to accepting the fact that as the sharp end of the sword, the aviation industry has an opportunity to collect and share information in a way that can keep the population safe.
Right. Perfect. Ian, lastly, let me benefit a little bit of your extensive expertise in infrastructure projects, airport projects, but infrastructure in general. Many projects around the world, infrastructure-wise, have been postponed, canceled, and it's obvious, like demand-driven, don't know demand, let's de-escalate the projects. But the infrastructure industry related to transportation and airport has been completely devastated as well. So how do you see, how's the market coming along right now? Are there now initiatives, or the market's still kind of in a warning situation right now?
There's certainly there's some early indications of people that are coming out that want to have their projects shovel ready for when the turnaround hits. So there's some groups that are trying to get ahead of the curve that way. I've had some really interesting conversations with industry experts, architects like Ryan Berger of Stantec, who runs their aviation practice, or Michael McDonald of Case and Kennedy, who he's the principal of that whole firm, and very familiar with airports as well.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those leading design team people about how do we reimagine infrastructure, because we've overbuilt infrastructure if we go to a risk-based security model and we're moving people more quickly. Well, there's lots of things we can do with that space to make it more flexible, to make it more usable. But in the end, I think if you are able to look at it this way, we should now be thinking about CapEx that enables an OpEx reduction. We used to think of CapEx, and we would often trade off. We'd get a lower CapEx and we'd increase OpEx over many years. We now need to think of it a little differently. What OpEx are we doing to lower what CapEx are we putting in place to lower operating expenses? Because that's the long-term driver for us right now. We don't need to build more infrastructure. We need to maintain what we have, but we need to make that infrastructure work for us in a different way. And so we've been talking to several international airports about their restart plan, and we've basically put together a package that says we will evaluate your pandemic response, what you did and what you're continuing to do, what your business continuity plan has been, and then what your restart plan is that actually takes your pandemic response plan and updates it for the next one, so that you're going to be more efficient and you're going to get to continuity faster, and then you're going to get to restart faster. So parts of those things are looking at your business model. Mm-hmm. So for example, how much money are you spending on common use terminal equipment? And even just heating and cooling and the electricity to all of that antiquated equipment. If your passenger is your partner and they're investing every year in their brand new smart device, they're taking that investment away from you. Now, there's huge lobby groups. I mean, does CETA like to hear that, or AirRank, or any of those groups they're already invested into all of that hardware. So they don't want to say, pull it all out, cancel those contracts, use the smart device as that investment. But there's some very hard decisions that have to be made about how this industry needs to look. And you're always going to need a check-in facility. There's always going to be people that don't have a smartphone or choose not to use it. But that's a very small percentage. We need to shift to the 80-90% of people that are able and would like to do it self-serve to move through. So OpEx or CapEx that would reimagine your check-in area to remove all of that equipment and make that some sort of money-generating facility, or facilitate the movement of your facility to make it a first-choice airport for safety, health safety. Those are the sort of things that are going to be coming now, I think.
And linking that final thought and that final comment, and linking this also to our risk management, business continuity line of the podcast. Yes, if the companies, the concessionaires, the transportation management entities are linking their business continuity plan, as you mentioned, to the previous paradigm, then we are kind of dead in a loop, right? So we're not moving forward.
And that's what we've been doing. If you read the literature from SARS, H1N1, MERS, Zika, Ebola, the cycle is exactly the same. And in fact, ICAO, very disappointingly so, they took 9 months to issue their return to service plan. And it was word for word taken from work they had done 11 years ago for H1N1, 12 years ago now. So we're not even trying anything new yet. We're still stuck in the old paradigm. And I'm not blaming individuals. I think if you get any individual in a room, they all have good ideas, but it's when you have associations that kind of demand groupthink. I mean, it's very hard for an airline to step out of and go against IATA. I mean, almost impossible. So, but when all those airlines start going bankrupt faster and faster and faster because the government money runs out, what's left? Right?
Yep. Yeah.
And then there's going to be upstarts. There's going to be people that come in and say, I'm going to start an airline. I'm going to run it a different way. I'm not going to use the main terminal that requires us to do all of the security screening. I'm going to opt for an unscreened flight, which under Canadian air regulations, you're allowed to do. And I'm going to operate it differently. And my screening is going to be, it's going to be done in a different way, but I'm not going to need all that heavy infrastructure. And then if you don't have flights and everybody else is bankrupt, I think Transport Canada and others are going to be entertained by this thing. So,
and at the end, all those different layers of security and services at the end goes back to your passenger, right? So
when you get on a cruise ship, well, when you get on a subway, or when you get on a train, or you walk through Central Park or Times Square, or Piccadilly in London, how do you keep those places safe? Do we security screen everybody that gets onto the metro? We do not. Do the metros blow up every other day? They do not. Why do we need this over heavy system for aviation? There's an inherent fear of flying. The catastrophe of a fuselage loss, a major crash, in the psyche, the image is very, very heavy, but it's still the safest way to travel by far. And we need to get ourselves to that point.
That's right.
The security screening and all this that we put in this very heavy system, all it does is keeps honest people honest. So we have to move to that model as quickly as we can.
Thank you so much, Ian, for your time and for your thoughts. It has been really a very insightful conversation. So hopefully we can talk soon about different topics related to aviation.
Yes, and I look forward to listening to your next guests. I've enjoyed the first two podcasts, and I hope I haven't lowered the bar too much, but looking forward to seeing your next podcast. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Ian. Have a great day. Take care.